Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, episode number 70. Dr. Karl Miller. The October Lull. Is it a fact or myth? The Food Plot Bible. The latest on whitetail deer movement. The deer hearing studies. And the whitetail glands. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, this is Jared Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. You're listening to my favorite hunting podcast ever, Jay and Dusty on the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hey, this is Lamar Smith from Brush Country Monsters in the Novilles Ranch here in South Texas. And you are listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hey, this is Corby Taylor, host of the Wildgame Hunting Podcast, and you're listening to another great episode of the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is your host, Jay Scott, of the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, and I am also here with my co-host, Dusty Phillips. Dusty, are you out there?
I am absolutely out here.
There you are, loud and clear. Gotcha.
Loud and clear. You're sounding healthier than ever. You know, and we're going to talk to an awesome guest today.
Hands down, one of the most knowledgeable individuals in the country when it comes to whitetail deer.
You know, absolutely, and you couldn't ask for more knowledge than this guy has to offer.
Yep. We're going to talk about some recent studies on deer movement that he has conducted with some help from his friends and some undergrads, right?
Yeah, there's a question that I've got for this particular guest to the show about the October Lull.
October Lull. Is it a fact or is it a myth?
We're going to get into that.
We're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about all the glands that are on the whitetail, how they're used, which ones are the most important to the whitetail hunter, and then basically everything that this guest brings to the table, we talk about it in a scientific way, but then we bring it back to the hunter to use and apply in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's questions that there's a lot of myth about that this is going to be facts.
Yes.
This is going to be studies. This is going to be a lot of money, a lot of time, and you know, the people that are doing the actual studies are working on their PhDs. I mean, it don't get no better than this.
Right. The PhDs are the helpers in this case, or the PhDs to be are the helpers in a lot of these studies. And by the way, we're going to talk about some food plot stuff, which is your favorite subject, Dusty.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I like to dig into that. But I got to stop you for a second before we get into this guest. We got to make a phone call.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
We got to make a phone call. You know, we're going to call Mark Clifford down Premier Outfitters in Western Kentucky.
Get an update.
We got to see what's going on down there.
Because, it's hot right there. And I know Mark's a good friend from back at the Great American Outdoor Show. And
yeah, absolutely.
Been buddy ever since. But he's running some amazing outfitter service down in Kentucky on free range. I don't even know how many acres, just a ton.
It's somewhere around 15,000 acres, and it's all free range megabucks.
Yes.
You know, if you're looking for a hunt, Premier Outfitters, Western Kentucky, PremierOutfitters.com. Check them out. I'll guarantee it from knowing Mark as long as we have now that, you know, for one, he's got awesome guides. He's got an awesome facility down there. And Mark is a 5-star outfitter for sure.
Yeah, you got our buddy Hal down there working it out, and he's got some great other help making sure that everything's going right and that the herd's healthy and that you're going to have a decent shot at killing a big whitetail in Kentucky. Now, granted, it is hunting, and it's just the way it is, right?
And nothing's guaranteed in hunting. That's guaranteed. A fact.
It's a fact. And it takes a good hunter to take out a whitetail. It's just the way it is. But I think we should get an update on what's happening in Kentucky right now with regards to the rut and how things are going down at Premier Outfitters. Let's get Mark on the phone.
Absolutely. Call him up.
Okay.
You got my buck picked out?
I've got a bunch of bucks picked out. I got them picked out for me.
Oh, man. Well, Mark, tell us what's going on down there at the farm, because I promised I'd give you a call because I've been hearing that there's some big bucks falling down there in Kentucky.
And I tell you what, last week was our 2-day muzzleloader hunt here in Kentucky, and we just had a blast. We had the team from Night Rifles in, and we had some other hunters in from across the United States, and we put 6 nice bucks down in 2 days.
Nice.
Deer are a little ahead of schedule here.
Okay.
A lot of scraping and rubs and seeing some bucks single some does out, and actually filmed a high 160-inch deer chasing a doe last week. So they're a little ahead of schedule. Yeah.
So it's well underway. What do you have left for openings in 2014 if we want to come down hunt Premier Outfitters?
We are slam booked through the rut. What I do have is I've got if a group of people want to come in for our December muzzleloader hunt, that's the second rut, 13th of December. If a group of guys would like to come in, we're going to offer a December muzzleloader hunt this year for the first time. So that's the only thing I've got, and we're already booking for 2015 and 16. 2015, we're about 60% booked right now.
Holy smokes! So we're out of luck if we want anything for 2014, unless you want to do the muzzleloader.
Absolutely, yeah, we're booked solid.
And you're over half booked already for next year.
We're about 60% booked for 2015 right now.
My goodness! All right,
that's awesome.
If I were to book a hunt down there, do you have like minimum rack sizes?
We do. For our archery hunters, we want you to harvest a 130-inch animal.
Okay.
For our gun hunters, we want a 140-inch.
That's reasonable. I would think, you guys are growing some 150s and 160s routinely down there, so that should be kind of easy, I would think.
Yeah, we tell people to come to our place with an expectation of a 150-inch deer.
Right. That's
a good deer anywhere you go, and of course we harvest bigger deer every year, and we harvest some that are smaller, but that's a good expectation, a 150-inch deer with us.
Gotcha. Now, I want to make sure that we paint this picture correctly, is that this is not a guarantee.
Oh, absolutely not. It's we've got 15,000 acres. It's all free range.
Yep.
We're working grain farm here. There's corn and soybeans as far as you can see, and we plant supplemental food plots, and we have a nutritional program that we implement 12 months out of the year, but nothing's guaranteed. The only thing we can guarantee to do is take care of what's within our control, and, we can't control weather or the movement of the deer, but we run about a 60% opportunity rate with our archery hunters on 130 or better, and our gun hunts, we run about an 80% success rate. So
wow.
It's your odds are pretty good.
They're pretty good, but it's still hunting at the end of the day.
Still hunting. Oh,
still
yeah,
hunting.
yeah. It's not an easy hunt. I mean, it's you got to put your time in and be willing to put forth the effort that it takes to harvest one of these animals. We're going to give you 110%. We just ask that you give us 100%
right.
in turn.
Now, is it all stand hunting, or can you do some stuff like spot and stock and that kind of thing?
We don't do any spot and stock. Everything we do is we do our archery hunts out of lock-ons and ladder stands, and our rifle hunts we use shooting houses and blinds and ladder stands.
Gotcha. Well, awesome, man. Well, how do we reach out to you if we want to book a hunt for next year?
Well, you can go on my website. It's PremierOutfitters.com.
Could you spell that for me? Because I know there are multiple ways to spell Premier. Just spell Premier for us.
There is. It's PREMIER.
Got it.
PremierOutfitters.com. And you can contact us right through the website and give me a call. I'll be glad to talk to anybody, and I'll give you the time to talk about a hunt and any of the questions anybody wants to ask me. I've got plenty of time to talk to everybody.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for checking in with us, Mark. And we have, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but I'm sure you have. Dr. Karl Miller is joining us on the Big Buck Podcast. And
Absolutely.
Just want to make sure you're still tuning in to the Big Buck Podcast every Saturday morning.
Every Saturday morning, man. We've got our ears on listening for you.
All right.
Awesome.
Rock and roll. All right, man. I'll call you as soon as I can. We got to get on with the next guest here. But are you out tomorrow, Mark?
Yes, I'm going to hunt in the morning. We'll be be filming for deer and deer hunting TV. Got my eye on a 170-inch deer that I'm going to try to take.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, man. Appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for the update.
Take care, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You know, I'm ready to go to Western Kentucky to hunt with Mark Clifford there, Premier Outfitters. You know that?
I am too. I would love to join Mark on a hunt. He's a tremendous individual. He's running a great outfit, and it's always good to hear from him. Just see what's going on.
Absolutely. You know, it sounds like they got potential for some possible state records down there this year again. And you know, the proof's in the pudding. Mark, Hal, and the rest of the crew down there at Premier Outfitters, they put the time in.
Yep.
They try to give you the opportunity of a lifetime and put 125% into their facilities to make that happen.
Yep. Mark, Hal, Tad, and a bunch of other guys down there getting the job done. So, well, good luck. And if you want to go on that late season muzzleloader hunt down in Kentucky, first time ever, they're opening it up this year. But other than that, you go wait till next year, and he's already 60% full from what I understand. So you better book now if you want to get on that world-class hunt down in Kentucky.
Absolutely. You know, check them out, premieroutfitters.com. Look up Mark Clifford, and we promise that he won't steer you wrong, and you'll have a great, great hunting experience.
Yep. Dude, let's get on to our guest of the night.
Let's get on with it.
Dr. Karl Miller.
Man, I'm excited about this.
One of the most premier experts in whitetail knowledge in the whole country, and has been for years, from the University of Georgia. Just a tremendous individual, writing some great studies on deer hunting and deer movement, and has written numerous articles, has been quoted on all kinds of things, was recently on the Sportsman's Channel's State of the Whitetail. He's just the man. And
absolutely, you know, full of knowledge when it comes to whitetails, and I know you don't want to miss this podcast for sure.
Well, let's stop chatting about it, Dusty. Let's get him on the line.
Let's call him up.
All right, let's do it. Dr. Miller, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Jay?
Doing well. I've got Dusty on the other line here, and we'd like to pick your brain tonight, if that's cool.
Okay.
Now, I know you're getting close to retirement, and you got a lot of projects going on. So where are you right now?
Where am I?
Yeah, physically. Where are you?
I'm located in the state of Georgia, at the University of Georgia.
Okay.
I've been here. Well, I came here for grad school, and then I've been hired on since then. So I've been here on the faculty at the university here for over 30 years now.
No kidding. All right. So are you looking forward to retirement, or is that something you're going to keep studying deer for the rest of your life?
You know, I can never walk away from this. I got into this field because it's my love, and it's going to always be my love. It just might be I'd do it in a different capacity at some point.
Gotcha.
And I'm going to be able to do it on my terms. So.
Right. Exactly. Which is always kind of comfortable. How many degrees do you have?
I've got the three typical college degrees. The bachelor's. I actually got my bachelor's degree at Penn State.
Okay.
I'm a native of Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
Went to Ohio State, got my master's degree there, and then came to the University of Georgia and got my PhD here.
Gotcha. And do you have an undergrad in entomology? Is that correct?
How did you know that?
See, I do my homework.
You're pretty good, yeah. That's kind of it's a long, unusual story, but you know, it's one of those things. When I was a kid, I grew up. I wanted to be a deer biologist. Probably since I came out of the womb. But I listened to parents and guidance counselors and such, and they said, "Don't go into wildlife because you're not going to get a job."
Right.
So I ended up working one summer for a guy that was doing some stream ecology, and he was working with aquatic insects in trout streams, caddisflies and stoneflies. And I said, "Hey man, this could be pretty cool. I could make a living doing this. It's not deer hunting, but it's trout fishing, so that's pretty close."
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's why I switched into entomology. But finally, when I got to Ohio, I made the decision. Somebody's getting a job in wildlife. Somebody's working with deer. That could be me, and I'm just going to make it happen.
Very neat. So you've been doing this for 30 plus years.
Right.
Does it ever get boring?
Never.
That's awesome.
Never. I'll tell you what gets the boring part.
All right.
And doing research at a university is a little bit different than it was 30 years ago. And the administrative burden, the overhead burden, all the regulations coming down from the federal government, the state government, from the university and stuff, I spend most of my time administering things. And then, the graduate students that I have working with me on a lot of different projects, they get out in the woods to do all the fun stuff.
Gotcha. So you all the fun stuff is in the field, and that's where you would rather be, but you kind of end up being the administrator because you're the smartest one and you've been around the longest.
Well, maybe. I don't know if I'm the smartest. I've been around the longest. We'll leave it there.
All right. Excellent. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about deer movement and some of the studies you've been doing with that. I've talked a little bit with Jim Stickles, I think is how you pronounce his last name.
Yeah, he's one of my graduate students. As a matter of fact, he's going to be finishing up within the next month with his master's degree.
Wow, that's exciting. That's very cool. And
he's just taken a job working as an assistant deer biologist for the state of Florida.
Good for him. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's real pleased, and we're proud of him, too.
That's awesome. That's just a great story. So the studies that you, and you've had Jim in the field doing some studies on deer movement in particular, what kind of things have been revealed that you were, well, I guess as a scientist, you make a hypothesis, right? And then you try to prove or disprove whether that's accurate.
Yeah, and that's part of it. And sometimes it's just observation, where you don't really have an hypothesis. You just got to take a look and see what is happening, and then you try to figure out why. And that's when you raise the hypothesis,
Gotcha.
when you try to figure out why they're doing certain things.
Gotcha. All right, so tell us about some of the whys you've discovered as part of your deer movement studies.
We've had deer movement studies going on for as long as I've been working there, and the old technology we used to use, what was the VHF technology, where you always picture biologists out there with an antenna that's beeping, and they get a location.
Yep.
That got us an awful lot of information, and actually my predecessor here, Larry Marchand, was the first one to hang one of those radios on a deer many years ago.
No kidding.
And which is a whole other story, but that got us a lot of good information on deer home range size and deer movements and habitat use and such like that. But the problem with that type of technology is it was relatively coarse-grained. It wasn't very accurate of where the locations were. And you couldn't get location. You get a location once every day or 2 days or every 3 days. So you didn't get a lot of good idea of this fine-scale movement of what these deer are doing on an hourly or shorter time period.
Gotcha.
In the last decade or so, with the advent of GPS technology, where we can put GPS collars on it and get this real fine-scale data, it started to reveal a lot of new information and a lot of stuff that we never knew that deer even did. We've had I'd say 6 or 8 different studies where we where we use GPS technology. Most notably, some of our work is looking at buck movement, particularly mature buck movements, and we've had studies in Pennsylvania. We finished up one in Pennsylvania. We've got one going on in Louisiana right now, and one in Georgia, and we're about to start up a big study down in South Florida as well, looking at the movement ecology. The first 3 were primarily looking at the movement ecology of these mature bucks.
Gotcha. Now, have you noticed any differences between the states and how the big bucks move, or are they pretty consistent data?
If you look at our studies and then you combine them with the other studies that have been done, there's been a number of other universities doing studies like this as well. Auburn University has some stuff going on, North Carolina, Texas A&M Kingsville, Mississippi State. You start putting all these pieces together of these things. You start to find a lot of similarities, but you find some differences, and obviously how deer move in South Texas is going to be different than how deer move in Georgia versus Pennsylvania.
Right.
But there's a lot of commonalities. Deer going into the rut are going to do the same types of things as you move through the breeding season, no matter where you are in the country.
Gotcha.
I want to jump in here real quick, Jay. When you say a deer study, how long do you particularly stick with a GPS unit on one particular mature buck? The technology changes yearly, and what we used to be able to do, which we thought was great 5 years ago, we're doing it a lot better now. The length of time that we can put a collar on a deer is related to how frequently we want to take a signal, because it's battery life that runs it. Gotcha.
But typically, if we're running getting a number of locations per day, we can run a collar for 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's a curiosity. I wanted to know how long you stuck with a particular buck.
Yeah, so most of our studies, obviously with technology, that you've got collar failure, you've got deer dying, so you're losing deer at all times as well. But typically our goal is to try to get about 2 years out of a collar and get out of a particular buck.
Gotcha. So you got 2 years. How many deer are you studying at one time?
Depends on the study, and that obviously depends on the funding. Right. These collars are not cheap. They're a minimum of $2,000 plus per collar per deer. Plus, you got to pay to get the deer collared. You got to go out there and do the captures. hire the technicians, hire the students to do that as well. And then you got to pay for the data as you're acquiring the data as well. So, each one of these animals is a very expensive animal when we start getting the data in.
Right.
But typically, our study in Pennsylvania, we had about a dozen mature bucks collared. In Louisiana, we've got probably better than twice that. We're probably in the 20s. The other study we have in Georgia, we're probably in the 30s.
Gotcha.
So at any given time on one particular study area, we'll have 10 to 30 mature bucks collared.
Okay. So what did the data reveal on the big bucks? Anything like glaring that was not known before?
Yeah, there's a couple of really cool things. And I think the coolest thing, and we're trying to get our heads around right now, is it used to be when we were doing studies, you figured out what the deer did on average. What does an average 3.5-year-old buck do at this time of year? What we're finding out with the GPS technology is there is no such thing as an average deer. Every deer is different. Every deer has basically a different, we can't call it a personality, maybe we'll call it a deernality.
Sure.
But every deer acts differently. They have different bucks have different breeding strategies. They have different home ranges. They have different things that they do at different times of the year. So what we're starting to see is the variability is the important aspect, and that, I think, how it relates to a hunter as well.
Right.
That you can't say a mature buck does this. You can say some mature bucks do that, but other mature bucks do something very different.
That's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So,
and that's really neat. And a couple other really neat things. Well, let me give you a couple of examples of that. We're all familiar with, some bucks get into bachelor groups during the non-breeding season. They hang out together. Sometimes these bucks may get into these bachelor groups in their summer range, and their breeding range may be 2 and 3 miles distance from there. So they hang out with the guys all summer long on one site, and then come the breeding season, some bucks will just pick up and move and go to a completely separate site, whereas other bucks will stay in the same area. Now, there's also some bucks that don't like to get into bachelor groups, and they hang out by themselves almost year-round. And we're seeing, it's very interesting. We've got a couple bucks. We got in Louisiana where we've got a bachelor group that's set up, and there's another mature buck right next to them, and it's almost like a straight line delineation between these groups, and they really don't cross between them. And this was during the summertime. So it's almost like they had different territories. Maybe they just didn't like each other. I don't know. But it's, the thing I keep coming back to is the idea that these bucks do different things, and you try to get your head around that, and Let me give you another example of something else we found. One of the things that we started with GPS collars, one of our earlier studies on GPS technology looking at female movements, is we found that during the breeding season, some of these females would take off on these long, what are called excursions. They just pick up and leave their home range, go for maybe a mile or more, hang out for half a day to a day, and turn around and come back. And, our thoughts are that is a doe that was coming in heat, and she was going out looking for the best partner she could find. And then other studies that from other people started showing that bucks were doing the same thing. They were picking up and going on these excursions. And they may go a mile or two out of their home range, hang out for a little while, and turn around and come back. So that's, when you think about it as a hunter thinking about that, you've got a hunter out there, and all of a sudden this buck shows up that they've never seen before on camera or during the summertime. That's probably a buck either changing its home range during the breeding season, or it's a buck that's on one of these excursions.
Right. Yeah.
Now, let me go one more step further than this. Our study in Pennsylvania was the first to reveal this. And this is what's neat about having this fine-scale movement is we had about a dozen bucks collared up in Pennsylvania, and carried them through the breeding season, throughout the winter. The following spring, most of these bucks went on a long excursion that would last 24 to 48 hours, and they'd take a straight line walk. Some of them walked several miles, straight line, stopped, hung around just for a little bit, and turned around and came back almost the same direction. Now the question is, what were these bucks doing in spring? It was, sometime between April and June when they did this. A couple of them did it multiple times, but they, why were they doing that other than maybe just stretching their legs and, as they say in Australia, just going walkabout?
Right.
But this is something we would never picked up with the old technology, because we would have thought, well, we just didn't get a signal that day.
Gotcha.
And the next day they'd be back.
Interesting. So you know they did it, but the why is what you're trying to figure out now.
Yeah, that is the big question: is the why are they doing that? We thought for a while that maybe they were going back to their natal range where they were born and they had since dispersed from. But that doesn't, given the data that we're looking at, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit up with a lot of what we know about buck dispersal as yearlings. What was interesting, most of them in Pennsylvania were in a south or southwesterly direction. Not all of them, but most of them were.
South or southwesterly direction.
Yeah, so you start trying to piece these things together, you just, I really don't have a good hypothesis for why they are even doing this.
Right, gotcha. Well, that's fascinating. It's like it's almost it answers a lot of questions about what they're doing, but then it raises a whole other number of questions about why.
About why, exactly.
Wow. So the more you know, the less you realize you don't know.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating. So are those studies ongoing today as we speak?
Yeah. The one in Pennsylvania has been finished. That was a student by the name of Andy Olson. He finished his master's degree on that study up there. The one in Louisiana and the one in Georgia, those are two studies that we have one more year of data to collect on those before we start doing the analysis of them. So that data will be coming available within the next probably 18 to 24 months.
Okay. Is there anything that we can extrapolate from this for the hunter and how to apply it to a more successful hunt?
Yeah, there's a couple things. And here, let me use Andy's stuff that he did in Pennsylvania as an example about what this could relate to a hunter. He had some bucks up there, and we were looking at their annual home range and their seasonal home range. And you take their seasonal home range of these bucks that are, say, September, October, November, December, and you plot that out. It's probably anywhere from, depending on the buck, 500 acres, 800 acres, somewhere in that range, maybe in 1,000 acres for certain bucks. There's variability in different bucks having different home ranges. But when the breeding season hits, their use of that home range really is kind of interesting on how they make use of that, the pattern of use of that home range. Because for one week, their core area, which is where they spend the most of their time, that's what we call their core areas, where they spend about 50% of their time, may be very small and concentrated on one very small portion of their home range, and they don't even use the rest of their home range. And then a week later, you may pick them up in a completely another part of their home range. Now, very likely a part of this is related to them tending a doe in a particular region or a particular area, but it doesn't tell you why they would be there for a full week. So what this would suggest is if you're sitting on a deer stand and you saw a good buck and you want to continue to hunt that area, for during bow season or gun season, and all of a sudden you don't see him for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days or something like that. You think the stand got cold, or you think maybe he got killed. He might be just using some other part of his home range. And if you hang it out, he will be back, unless he gets killed somewhere else, obviously. But he'll as long as he's alive and you're in his home range, trying to identify where that core area is and where he's focusing in can be very important.
Gotcha.
And part of that is going to be focusing in on, particularly with some of these bucks. These bucks are focusing in on some of these doe groups and where these doe groups are hanging out. And these doe groups are going to be hanging out in certain areas depending on where the food resource is, whether there's an acorn crop or a beechneck crop or something.
Okay. So you can still focus on the does, you can still focus on the food crop, and if a deer disappears that you've been watching for a while, don't worry, he's probably coming back unless he gets taken down the road.
Right.
Gotcha.
Now that's saying for some deer, but that like I said, the variability among bucks have different strategies.
Right. Gotcha.
And some of the stuff that they've done, some fascinating stuff in South Texas down in Kingsville. So they had a PhD student, and they had bucks that had completely different strategies. Certain bucks would be the bucks what we kind of call a dominant floater. During the rut, they just covered a lot of territory, moving from area to area. And down there where they feed deer, they have feeders that they actually were moving from feeder to feeder, trying to intercept does and check out doe groups at each one of those feeders. Whereas other bucks might just decide that they're going to camp out at a feeder and maximize their visibility at one spot. So they're actually would be the harder one to kill. Well, it'd be easier one to kill once you found out his pattern, because he'd be very consistent there. But, he doesn't move a whole lot. So unless you figured out exactly where he was, you'd never see him.
Gotcha. Fascinating. So as you said, deer have their own personalities, so you can get some generalities from it, but everybody's different, just like humans are different. They're going to do different things at different times, and they might just change their mind on a whim.
You're absolutely correct, and that's really what we're trying to actually put a handle on and try to quantify some of that aspect of it.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thank you for the deer movement update, and I'd love to hear some more as the more data rolls out, and have you come back at some point and talk more about that, if that would be cool. I'd like to move on to your paper that you wrote about deer talk with their noses, specifically about the glands that the whitetail have. And we haven't really talked about glands on the show yet. So I know this is an area of a topic that you've covered before.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could run down some of the stuff with us.
Yeah, that table you're referring to is something that I wrote actually quite a number of years ago.
Right.
Back in the 80s and the early part of the 90s, we were really intensely focused on understanding deer scent communication here. And most of the glands, or a good portion of the glands that are identified on a deer, we were able to identify here and actually work out some of the details of how these glands are used, if in fact they are used at all on a deer. And since then, we've gone on and moved more away from scent communication to look at the deer's visual acuity and to look at the deer's ability, their hearing ability. But getting back to the scent glands, well, basically, we know that there's 7 glands on a deer that have been identified. We don't know about some of the use of some of those glands, whether they're even important as a scent producer, but we do know that certain ones of them are very important. These glands are easy to remember and they're easy to identify. Every hunter can recognize these glands, and particularly if they recognize that there's a distinct distribution on the deer's body. There's 3 on the head, 3 on the legs, and 1 halfway between. And that 1 halfway between only occurs in boy deer, so you know where it's at.
Gotcha. All right,
right.
Gotcha.
I don't know, you guys from New Hampshire, I'm not sure about, but
Dusty's from Ohio. Thanks
I agree. I agree about the New Hampshire guys.
Man, oh man.
Yeah,
I get beat up a lot.
Anyways, so the 3 glands on the head that I think most people were familiar with, or at least some of them, the one in front of the deer's eye is called the preorbital gland, or it's also called the lacrimal gland.
Okay.
And it's one gland that we know in antelope. The antelope has that same type of gland, and they use that gland as a territorial marker, some of the African antelope species. In whitetails, we're not sure that even functions as a scent gland. There's some people that have some suggestions that they do, and that they use that at marking an overhanging branch at a scrape. But I've watched some high-speed video of these, and I've never seen them where there is actually any type of overt marking of a branch with that preorbital gland. So that one, I think we're still kind of up in the air about that one as far as a scent-producing gland. It's probably, if it does at all produce a scent, it's probably not that important. Probably doesn't have a lot of importance for a hunter as well.
Okay.
Another one on the deer's head that's not that important as well, it may not even be functioning as a scent gland, is one that's actually located inside the deer's nose. Right as you open up the deer's nares, right at the black end of the deer's face, right inside there's a small almond-shaped structure that's made up of a type of gland called a sebaceous gland that empties into the nose by a little duct. And the deer's body has a lot of sebaceous glands associated with it. Every hair on a deer's body, every hair on your body has a sebaceous gland associated with it. This one's just a very grossly enlarged one. And it produces a kind of fatty material called a lipid. And it's very likely that this one, instead of being something that's used for scent communication, it probably functions more as a lubricant. Because if you think about a deer, the only place on a deer's body where there isn't hair covering it is the tip of a deer's nose, right?
Right.
Okay, the sebaceous glands associated with all those hairs produce that oil and helps protect the skin and moisturize the skin. Without having that on the hairs on the deer's nose, other than those few small hairs, it would have a tendency for that to get chafed, to get chapped very easily. And maybe this is just functioning as a kind of lubricant, kind of like a chapstick.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we really don't, those 2 of them we really call scent glands, but we really don't think they're that important at this point. The one on the head that we know is very important is the one that's located between the antlers and the eyes or between the ears and the eyes on a doe, and it's called the forehead gland. And it's not actually a gland itself, but it's actually an area of enhanced glandular activity in the skin. And that glandular activity increases during the breeding season, both in bucks and does, but it increases most in mature bucks during the breeding season because it is under the influence of testosterone. And that's the gland that they're using when they're marking a rub, when they're leaving the scent on a rub tree, and very likely the gland that they're using when they're marking an overhanging branch at a scrape.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so you got the 3 on the head.
Got the 3 head ones. Got it.
Okay, let's move to the legs.
All right.
Between the digits on all 4 feet is a gland called the interdigital gland. And you can see we're real creative with those names.
Right.
If you look at it and you kind of open up between the deer's toes on the top side of the deer's foot, what we call the dorsal side, there's a little sac there. And that little sac there is what's called the interdigital gland. And if you put your nose to it, it kind of has the aroma of rancid butter.
Interesting.
And what we know is that there are a whole host of different types of compounds that are produced in these interdigital glands. Now, what's neat about these things, these compounds have different what are called molecular weights. Some are very small compounds, some are very large compounds. And the very small ones are very volatile, which means they emit real fast.
Okay.
The very large ones emit real slow. So what that would suggest to us, and this is just our running hypothesis of what's going on here, is that when a deer steps and makes a footprint out in, as it's walking, it's leaving some scents there of all these different compounds. And because of that different volatility, that fresh track would be dominated by those those highly volatile compounds. But by necessity, over time, those would kind of wear out, and the scent of the track would then have to change through time.
Right.
And that might be how a deer tells the direction of a track, how a predator tells the direction of a track, and how old the track was.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, let me add something to that, because I had a student a number of years ago, one of my PhD graduate students, John Gassett, who did some more sophisticated analysis of the interdigital gland secretions, and we found that mature bucks, there were, and I cannot remember the exact number of compounds, but there was about a dozen or more compounds that were in higher concentration in the interdigital gland of mature dominant bucks than subordinate bucks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That should get you thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
Because what does a buck do when he makes a scrape? He works the overhanging branch, and then he paws a shallow depression, removes the leaf litter.
Right.
And he's not doing that just because he doesn't want leaves in his scrapes. He's leaving this scent there from his interdigital gland, and very likely it's a gland. It might be having some indication of what his relative dominant status might be.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of cool stuff, right?
That is very cool. Okay.
That is really cool.
Fascinating.
Okay, we got three more to go. Okay, moving up on the outside of the deer's hind leg, there's that oval patch of skin that surrounds that black callus material. That's called the metatarsal gland. That's actually still part of the deer's ankle there.
Okay.
Actually, it's part of the deer's foot. In black-tailed deer and mule deer, that gland's a lot larger, and in black-tailed deer, it's been shown that gland actually can produce what's called an alarm pheromone that gives off an odor when a deer is alarmed.
No
now,
kidding.
we've done, years ago, we did some work trying to determine whether or not this gland was even functional in a white-tailed deer, and we have been, to date, unsuccessful.
Okay.
Does that mean that it's non-functional in white-tailed deer? Possibly, or possibly it means we just haven't been clever enough to figure it out yet.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
And finally, on the legs, the one that every hunter's familiar with is the one on the inside of the deer's hind legs. It's called the tarsal land or the hock gland, and that's that patch of long hair on the inside of the deer's hind legs.
Right.
Now, one of the things that's neat about this gland, and there's a lot of detail on how this gland works, but the gland actually is not producing the scent there. The scent that's coming on that tarsal gland is coming from urine that's deposited on those tarsal glands during a behavior called rub urination. And we're all familiar with bucks during the rut. They rub urinate over their tarsal glands, and they take on that real stinky, ruddy odor. But what a lot of people don't realize is that deer do this year-round, and all deer do this.
Really? So
does will do it at least once a day. Generally, when they get up from a nocturnal bed, they'll get up, stretch, and rub urinate over their tarsal glands. Even day-old fawns urinate over their tarsal glands.
Huh.
And this is what helps them to develop, and they end up developing their personal scent from that. We recognize each other by looking at each other's face. Deer recognize each other by the scent on their tarsal gland.
Gotcha.
Now, the way that works is that you probably smelled fresh urine and then you smelled a tarsal gland, you realize it's a lot different, right?
Right.
Well, what turns out is the urine that's deposited on that tarsal gland does not have the biological significance until it has undergone some biological or bacterial degradation on the tarsal gland itself. Because there's a number of different species of bacteria that are associated with the tarsal gland, which, by the way, there are some that are, things like Listeria and so forth. So the next time you're playing with the tarsal gland, don't stick your finger in your eye or something like that. You can wash your hands.
All right, so some nasty bugs on that.
There's some known baddies on there. But there are some bacteria in there that actually make a living breaking down that urine and urinary products, and that helps release the odor associated with a rutting buck, or associated with the doe as well.
Gotcha. So little bacteria, a little bit of urine. It's all part of the smell that we get on that nasty gland.
Right. And and just like when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you to fill the cup because he can tell a lot of things from what's going on in your body by your urine, very likely deer can do that same thing. They can probably assess, maybe relative dominance through, some testosterone metabolites. They might, it's probably how they help identify who that deer is and help that personal profile of that deer.
Interesting.
Okay, and then the final one. It's only on boy deer. It's one we actually reported on it's probably close to 15 years ago or so now or more. But it's located, it's called the preputial gland. It's located right at the end of the deer's penile sheath.
Okay.
And it's one of those which in fallow deer we know that has some important scent production significance. In whitetails it's not quite as big as in fallow deer, and we think it may also be more like the nasal gland and probably used more for lubrication than it is for as a scent producer.
Gotcha. That's the most elaborate breakdown of glands I think we've ever gotten.
Absolutely.
Oh, good, because there's a lot more detail to it beyond that. But I think if you boil it down, the forehead gland, the tarsal gland, and the interdigital gland, 3 out of the 7 are the important ones to be concerned with.
And what can we do to take away, or what can we take away from that as a hunter to use this knowledge to our advantage?
Okay, there's one more thing I want to tell you that relates to this, and this is an important aspect as well. Deer have the same 5 senses that we have, sight, vision, hearing, and touch and taste, and, all those. But they also have a 6th sense in the fact that they have a second nose. If you look at the top of a deer's mouth, right behind where their top of their teeth should be, deer don't have teeth on the top and front.
Right.
But right behind there's a little diamond-shaped structure called the vomeronasal organ. Now, we've all seen pictures of, or actually have seen deer go up to a place where a doe had urinated, take some of that urine up into its mouth, and do this behavior called a lip curl or a Fleeman behavior.
Just going to say lip curl. Okay.
Right. And most people suggest that is something that the buck is using to tell whether or not that doe's in heat.
Okay.
And it's not.
It's not. All right, got it.
It's not.
All right.
And there's a number of reasons why it's not, but primarily the physiological pathways, in other words, the neural pathway to the deer's brain doesn't go to the appropriate part of the brain for it to get that type of information. Instead, it goes to a part of the brain that helps to release hormones within the deer. And what it's basically doing is getting that buck is increasing the libido of that buck, getting that buck more primed, more ready for the rut when he does that type of stuff.
Interesting.
He's not picking up on whether or not she's in heat by using that vomeronasal organ. He can already know that from his nose. Okay, put all this stuff together. And what this tells you is that maybe, estrus urine is not the clue for, a buck telling a doe in heat. But what we do know is bucks and does use urine a lot in communication.
Right.
They urinate on their tarsal glands at least once a day. Bucks during the breeding season almost exclusively urinate on their tarsal gland. They assess urine by use of a specialized organ in the roof of their mouth. So urine can be attractive to deer. Maybe not why some of these manufacturers might tell you why, because it's a doe and heat urine, but, urine, particularly not, a decent urine product can be an effective technique.
Okay. All right. So the right urines could actually put you in a better spot or better position to attract a big buck.
It could do that, or it could make them feel maybe more comfortable because they feel like there's another deer there, or, even with bucks, because they might assess dominance or something like that, it could work as a challenge scent among bucks.
Okay, gotcha.
Get them to frequent a scrape more often or frequent an area where he thinks there might be a rival.
Gotcha. Well, we've had some success with that, or Dusty has in Ohio, using the dominant buck tarsal gland scent, right, Dusty?
Absolutely, and that's a great spot to ask the question. The deer urine comes out of New Hampshire. I get it shipped to Ohio, and it seems a curiosity of the bucks here in Ohio of this particular urine is greatly more than a actual urine from here in Ohio. Would that be something that the deer would pick up, that it's total different urine from different area, or not?
Boy, that seems like it would be a very unusual that they would, particularly related to anything as far as reproduction would be concerned. However, one thing we do know is that urine reflects what an animal's been eating as well. And what they may have been eating in New Hampshire may be different than what they're eating in Ohio. Even your urine does the same thing. It reflects what you've been eating, the odor of it. So that odor profile can be, and maybe the curiosity might be more related to diet than anything else. I don't know. That's just an idea. I don't know for sure.
Well, that's a fascinating hypothesis there. Okay. Well, all right. We've got a new study for you,
right.
Dr. Miller.
You can tell you're talking to a scientist.
Exactly. Yep. Right. All right. Dusty, do you have a topic you want to cover here? I've got a bunch, but anything on your plate?
Yeah, I do, and one thing in particular that comes to mind, that the deer color. What do the deer actually see color wise?
That's interesting that you ask about that, because we just recently finished up a really, really neat study on that. But I'm going to make it a little more detailed than that for you. You think my story about the glands was detailed? We'll get another one here.
All right.
Well, let's do it.
I'm into the detail. I like this stuff.
Absolutely. It's something that we're all going to learn.
Okay. we've been working a lot on deer vision over the last about decade or more, and we're finding that not only is deer color vision a little bit different than ours, but there's so many other aspects of deer vision that they live in a completely different visual world than we do. They view their environment through their eyes so much differently. But getting specifically to the color aspect of it, about 20 years ago, might even be a little bit more than that now, we did a study where we got together with a group out of the University of California at Santa Barbara, and these guys were at the cutting edge of understanding vision physiology and vision anatomy. And we brought them to the University of Georgia where we had the deer and stuff, and we set up a study where what we actually did is went into the deer's eyes and to see if they had the physiological mechanisms that would allow them to see in color. Now, let me take you back to high school. You know that our color vision, or our vision, is based on two structures, our rods and our cones that are in our retina, right?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
The rods are what we see in black and white in dim light conditions. The cones are what we actually use to see in color. Well, how those cones work is they have what are called photopigments on them. We as humans have photopigments. We have three different photopigments. One that peaks at red, one that peaks at red, green, and blue. And all the colors that we see are some combination of those three colors, right?
Right.
So for a deer to see, for any animal to see in color, it has to have at least two different photopigments on its cones. We have three, so we see what is called trichromatically. Okay. Well, when we went into the deer's eyes and with this the technology that they brought with us, we were able to determine that deer didn't have three photopigments on their cones; they had two, which basically means that they probably see what is called dichromatically.
Okay.
Their one cone was almost identical to our blue cone, and their other cone was halfway between our red and our green. Now, that raises some inferences from that, which would suggest that deer see blues very well, but it means that they don't see as far into the red part of the spectrum as we do. So something that's real dark red to them would look probably black. But it also means that they don't see blaze orange as well as we do.
Right.
Okay. So the implication for this, this is based on, our understanding of the physiology of it. And the implications for that is for the hunter who goes to the woods wearing blue jeans, which humans can't see very well, but deer can see, and not wearing his blaze orange, which humans can see and deer can't see, the guy's an idiot, right?
Right. Okay. That's,
okay.
Those were the words I was thinking.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good way to put it.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, because it's absolutely just the wrong thing to do because you're much more visible to a human, but you're much less visible to a deer wearing blaze orange.
Right.
Okay, now the thing about that study was that looked at the physiology of it. There are other things that can affect the actual body's ability or the deer's ability to actually see those colors. There are pigments in the lens. There are difference in the neural connections and how they're adapted. So what we needed to do next was to get some idea where the deer could tell us what they're seeing. And the way we ended up doing this, I have a graduate student who was working on his master's at the time. I kept him because he's so bright. I kept him as a PhD student, and now he's working with me as a postdoc on some of this aspect of deer vision. Nice. But he actually, the problem with getting a deer to do something is a deer will do anything that you want it to do as long as it's the deer's idea to do it. If you follow my drift.
Right.
So getting them to tell us what they're seeing is very difficult, and it would be extremely time-consuming. So what Brad, the student whose name is now Dr. Brad Cohen, but what he did as far as his master's research was he developed a prototype of this apparatus that would show different colors, and it's going to be hard to describe this thing, but what it would do is provide deer with an opportunity for a food reward. So you had two bins, and over each one of those two bins, you'd have a light. And when the light went on and the lids open up on those bins, if the deer chose the one with the light that was on, the bin stayed open, the deer was allowed to eat. If he chose the wrong one, the bin would close. And we were able to automate this and have these trials running 24 hours a day and get these deer trained.
Gotcha. It's like Pavlov's experiment.
It's basically, it's just what we call operant conditioning.
Right.
So what we ended up doing, we started off with a white light to train them. And then we worked with Eveready Energizer, and they actually developed a bunch of very specific LED lights for us that had a very tight spectrum. And we looked in the blues and looked in the reds, the two ends of the extremes of the deer's vision. And we could vary the light, the frequency of the light, and we could also vary the intensity of the light. And we kept varying this until we got to a point where it was obvious that the deer could not make the choice. They were picking the right one and the wrong one 50-50. But as long as they were picking the right one more often than not, we knew that they were actually able to see that light. And what's intriguing, he built the first one, and he brought me the data after the first one and showed me how well it was working and stuff like that. So we ended up building 8 more of them in our deer research facility. So we were running 8 of these trials 24 hours a day for a while and working through this, and we were able to get a tremendous amount of data in a very short time. And the bottom line was, it comes out that obviously their visual spectrum was somewhat similar to the pattern that we saw looking at their photopigments. But one of the things that we didn't expect is, let me back up. Their ability to see in the red was a little bit less than our ability to see in the red was what we did expect. What we expected to see was, in the human eye, although we have the blue photopigment, we don't see blues that well because we have a kind of a yellow filter in our lens. But the deer apparently does not have that yellow filter, and their ability to see blues was much, in a factor of about an order of magnitude greater than our ability to see blue.
Oh wow, no kidding.
Now that should strike home a couple things as well. And if you think about deer are crepuscular, primarily active in the morning and the evening, and then through the nighttime as well. But if you've probably been on a deer stand and you've known as you get towards dusk, you start to lose a lot of the reds and the greens, and everything seems to take on a blue haze.
Right.
And the deer is using that blue because that's that period of activity where the blue becomes very visible to the deer. If you've ever been sitting on a deer stand wearing blue jeans right at dusk, look down at your legs and it almost looks like your legs are glowing.
Right. Yeah.
Think about what that would look like to a deer.
It'd stick out like a sore thumb.
It would look me like a pair of glowing legs up there in a tree stand.
Right. Note to self.
So
blue
it
jeans.
keeps coming back to the idea. Do not wear blue jeans because you're playing right to the deer's specialty as far as vision.
Yeah, I know guys that shoot blue fletchings. That's no good.
Bad idea.
What's kind of interesting as well, and this is just a general observation I made. A lot of times foresters and wildlife biologists, when we're doing field work, we use flagging tape. Sometimes hunters use flagging tape to flag their stands.
Yep.
If you've ever used blue tape, you'll notice that a lot of times it disappears because deer seem to tear it down.
Really?
Is that right? Fascinating.
They will pick on it. They will leave pink, they'll leave orange, they'll leave red, but they will mess with blue.
Interesting.
It probably hurts their eyes.
I have no idea. No idea.
Is there a way to use this blue data about deer and the way they see to the hunter's advantage, other than not using it?
I think the flip side of it is the knowledge of not using blues is to your advantage.
Right.
By eliminating the blues and as well as eliminating a lot of the whites.
Okay.
Because the whites are reflecting a lot of blues because there's a lot of blues at that time. White is a reflection of all the colors, right?
Right. Gotcha. All right, so no blues, no whites.
And now here's one other thing. And you've all heard about whiteners and brighteners in clothing, right?
Yes.
You heard of UV brighteners. The way those things work is they take UV light and they re-radiate. It's a chemical that actually causes it to re-radiate in part of the spectrum that we can see. And typically that's in the blues.
Okay.
So these whiteners and brighteners that you see in your detergents, and sometimes it's embedded even into the clothes that we buy, those things enhance stuff at that part of the spectrum where deer sees very well.
Gotcha.
So as far as buying detergent or something like that, do not buy stuff that has whiteners and brighteners in it.
Gotcha.
Because again, you're playing right to the deer's strength.
Great for the house, or if you want to look good out on the town, but not when you're getting in your tree stand.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And look at your camo as well. If your camo's got a lot of brightness to it, particularly in the blues or in the whites, that's probably not something you want to pick up on.
Gotcha. Fascinating. All right. Let's move. Dusty, you all set with that topic?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on to the October lull. Is this real, or is it just something that we make up because it just seems that way?
I never knew of such a thing until I started reading about it in the magazines.
Gotcha.
So I think you know where I'm going to go with my opinion on this.
Right.
But, I have actually, when I started hearing about this thing, I went and I started talking to some other people that have done some GPS technology work as well. And had some of our students looking at the same type of data as well, using this fine scale movement, all the way back to the first study that actually hung some good study that hung GPS collars on some materials that was done at Chesapeake Farms in Maryland. None of them have shown any indication that there's a decrease in movement of mature bucks or any deer in October.
Interesting.
None of them. I mean, and actually there's a slow and a steady progression of increase through that period of deer movements.
No kidding.
So why do people think they see this October lull?
Right. Where did this come from?
Remember what we were talking about earlier, and these bucks moving at different times of the year. They have summer ranges, winter ranges. Their food habits change. You might see them in a soybean field, and then the soybean field's gone, they disappear, they go somewhere else, and all of a sudden you're not seeing that deer activity anymore. This is a time period where, during October, where you're seeing a tremendous shift in the food resources, because you're going from one type of vegetation where the summertime pattern going into a fall pattern, probably concentrating on mast that wasn't there during the summer, which means they're going to be in very different habitats and moving in those different habitats as well. Plus, it's also a time period when their behavior is shifting relative to the breeding season. They may have been in bachelor groups during much of the summertime into September. Those things break up, and the deer start moving, and they start up. They end up in different areas, so the butts are more dispersed throughout an area. And I think it's probably related more to those patterns. And then all of a sudden, when the rut kicks in, the deer start coming out of the woodwork because the deer, the bucks are constantly on the move right through the chasing and the breeding phase. I think it's more of a perception than it is a reality.
Interesting. All right, so you may not be seeing deer in your area, but it's probably not because of this lull thing. It's probably because they've moved on to a different area. It's not that they're not moving; they're just moving somewhere else.
Yeah, and add one more thing to that is by October, deer have their winter coats on.
Right.
So if you end up getting some of those days in October where it might be in the 70s or even here in the South, it might be in the 80s, those deer during the daytime are not going to want to move much. And you're not going to see them.
Bring that point up. It's been 80 degrees 3-4 days in a row here, humid, feels like Florida, and I haven't seen a deer in 5 or 6 days.
Right. If they're going to move, they're probably going to move, at nighttime.
Right. Gotcha. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Hey, questions about that, Dusty?
It's very comparable to a human. When it's extremely hot, we're overdressed. We don't want to move. It just,
Weather can influence deer movements a lot. It can influence people's perception of the rut too. Because you go out in November and you go out on one of those real crisp mornings and the air is real crisp and you just feel good to be alive.
Yeah.
And you just know you're going to see deer.
Right.
Because they're going to be running all over the place. You can just feel it in the air.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's in the air.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Love that. All right. So let's move on to the state of the whitetail in America today. Now, you did a little piece for the Sportsman Channel a little while back, as I recall. And what's your opinion of the herd in all of the U.S. right now?
Okay, that's interesting. It was Whitetail Properties put together this State of the Union of the Whitetail, and they did a fantastic job of putting that together and getting them multiple opinions. If people haven't seen it, they need to go to their website and take a look at that because it's really good stuff. And there's some varied opinions on there as well. But it's interesting. I gave a lecture today to a group of non-wildlife students. They were taking a course in natural resource management, and I was guest lecturing on deer. And really, I pointed out that we got three major issues with deer, and it's different issues in different parts of the country. We have issues of deer overpopulation, which are not near what they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. Most states have gotten their deer herds under control where everything is, through the use of hunting, deer populations have been brought down in a lot of states, and we have them in balance with their habitat most everywhere. But there are some areas where, state parks and national parks and state battlefields, national battlefields and stuff like that, where deer populations are completely out of control because we can't use hunting in there. And that deer overpopulation is having a very profound influence on the habitat and on the deer themselves. But that's kind of a minority of areas now. We also have an issue going on in some areas now of deer underpopulation.
Okay. And
that's related to a couple things. We've had a couple of outbreaks of hemorrhagic disease, particularly out in the Midwest.
Right.
And that had a very dramatic impact on it. Those are actually related to 2 drought years, very severe drought years. And hemorrhagic disease does show some patterns of being related to, very severe drought. Those are also some of our most productive deer habitats. Iowa and Wisconsin,
absolutely,
all through the upper Midwest out there,
right.
The great, the Corn Belt. I'm not concerned about those deer herds. They're going to recover very fast. The biggest issue with those deer herds is keeping them in control. So the deer herds got knocked back. They will bounce back really quickly.
Okay.
The other part is throughout most of the eastern United States, we're dealing with an issue that we didn't deal with 10 years ago, and that's the predation context. And there's been a number of studies that have been done. We've done quite a number of studies here as well, and looking at the influence of not only the coyote, but where they do occur, the black bear as well, and in some cases bobcats. All three of them are at levels that we have never seen before. At least in recent history.
Interesting.
Black bear populations are very dense. Bobcat populations have recovered dramatically, and the coyote is a new kid on the block. And what we're seeing is that their primary influence on deer population is by reducing recruitment. They take away fawns that don't have a chance to enter into the population. So basically your reproduction, the part of your reproductive engine is disappearing. So when the recruitment rate goes down, if we keep the same mortality rate by hunting as we were before then, the populations are going to have to decline. It just works out the numbers, right?
Right.
It's a very simple equation. And that's what we're seeing in a number of states where the population has started to decline in a number of states. And very likely that is related to this predation context. South Carolina, their deer population is down by 30% over the last decade.
Wow.
And, is that all related to the coyote and predation? I don't know. I doubt it. But I'm firmly convinced that the coyote is a major player.
Right.
Because if each coyote takes 1 or 2 fawns, that can have a very significant impact, particularly if the deer population gets fairly low and doesn't have the ability to respond. So, that's an issue that we're starting to come to grips with. We're trying to understand how we manage that, how we deal with, effectively change the predation rate, or maybe we need to back off on the harvest rate, particularly of does, because they are the reproductive engine that's going to provide the next generation. So we went from 10 to 15 years ago saying you can't shoot enough does to saying right now, hey, let's back off here. Maybe we need to be a little more conservative with our doe harvest.
Right. Which are the states of concern for you?
I'll tell you what, I don't know that I want to even address that.
Okay.
Because the state biologists in those states would know a lot more and
Gotcha.
have more detailed information than I would.
All right, fair enough.
One of the things we know about coyote predation is the predation rate of coyotes on fawns tends to be higher in the southern states than in the northern states.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm a little bit more concerned maybe about what's going on here in the south than in the north.
Yep.
But at the same time, we know that the coyote up in the northern states is a bigger animal than he is here in the south, and that coyote up north also has the potential to take some adult deer. So does it balance out? Potentially. But I think the bottom line is here, and one of the things we're finding down here as well is this coyote predation context can vary from year to year, and it can vary from region to region, and it can vary over a very short distance in the landscape. We've done some studies where we've done coyote removals and looked at the change in the recruitment rate, and in one study area we might have found a 50% increase in recruitment rates in response to removing coyotes. In another area 5 miles away we found no response.
Huh.
So what we're right now trying to do is trying to understand the coyote's behavior and the coyote's use of the landscape.
Right.
And we've got a large study just starting up this year. It's going to be in Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina are all contributing to this study. And we're going to have GPS collars out on a couple hundred coyotes throughout those 3 states, trying to get an idea of how their spatial use of these coyotes is on the landscape. And is there something we can find out from that that'll help us manipulate the coyotes?
Right. Well, that would be a fascinating study, and
it's going to be a big one.
That's just starting now?
There's a tremendous amount of data.
Gotcha. That's just starting now?
Yeah, we'll be actually collaring deer starting in January. I'm collaring coyotes starting in January.
Wow. Okay. I need to stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a 3-year study. Really neat.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that information. Now, the last thing I'd like to cover tonight, if we could, is...
Oh, hey, wait. Can we back up a second?
Absolutely.
I said there was 3 things. Those are only 2.
Okay.
Number 3 that I think is a major issue, and I think it's probably going to be one of the most important issues we deal with whitetail deer, is the idea of urban and suburban deer.
Right. Okay.
And I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And I mentioned that in my class today. I asked how many people grew up in a suburban habitat that had a deer problem. About half the class raised their hands. I said to the other half of the class, I said, if you grew up in a suburban environment, you may not have had it yet, but you will.
Right.
Because every suburban habitat where we can't use hunting as a tool to control deer populations, those deer populations are going to continue to grow and they're going to become problematic.
Right. Right. That's a very good point right there. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about building the best food plot that you possibly can. All right. So what do you know about that?
Several years ago through the QDMA, myself and Lindsay Thomas and Kent Kammeyer, we were the editors of a book called Quality Food Plots, and we got some of the best people in the country to write different chapters for. Yeah. And it's pretty much, kind of the deer food plot Bible right now, right. Because we got other good people to write certain parts of it. But there is a tremendous amount of information out there for the landowner, for the hunter who wants to put in food plots. And, you can find just about anything you need on the internet or on any of these different seed companies' websites. There are a lot of good products out there. There's a lot of good companies out there, and there's a lot of good information on food plots out there.
Gotcha.
What's the best thing to plant for a food plot? Well, you're going to hate my answer. It depends. And it depends on a whole variety of different things.
Okay.
It depends on what you want that food plot to do for you.
Okay.
It depends on your soil type. It depends on where you are. It depends on how big a food plot, what your deer herd looks like. So there's so many things that go into making the distinction of what you need to plant and how you need to plant your food plots. You have a number of considerations to take in before you get to the point of what do I plant for a food plot.
Okay. Dusty is a farmer, part-time, and he loves anything to do with food plots. Dusty,
absolutely.
This is your opportunity right now to ask Dr. Miller anything you want to know about food plot. So I'm going to let you open up here.
Maybe I might ask Dusty.
There you go. Yeah, Dusty knows a lot about this stuff. And Lee, anything that has to do with that, I go to Dusty.
You know, a lot of things that I take in consideration, and Dr. Miller hopefully will back me on this, is, you know, I want something on food plot that produces a lot of tonnage. Something that can be nipped off and come back with regrowth. And I kind of focal point on that. You know, beans are great. They have a lot of tonnage as far as greens. But once they mature and the yield's there, that's it. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things that the frost kills off. Is there anything on, you know, coming from being Dr. Miller, is there anything that you can recommend for tonnage that will withstand the frost?
Okay, here's a couple things to consider. I mean, you got the difference of whether you want to use annual or perennial plants. That's the first issue.
Correct.
And then you also got to deal with cool season and warm season plants. You know, particularly here in the South, there's an awful lot of food plots that are planted during September and October and actually still being planted right now. And these are plots that people use to hunt over, and they're plots that use to carry the deer through the wintertime. They're used by bucks following the rut to help them restore some of their body condition and so forth. But really, that's not the kind of that's the food plot that's going to help carry them through the winter, but it's not a food plot that's actually going to grow deer and grow big deer. If you want to grow deer and actually want to improve the nutrition to your deer herd, you got to concentrate on summertime, spring and summer food plots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because spring and summertime are the only times when deer are actually growing. And it's also the time when bucks are putting on weight. It's also the time does are going through the final stages of gestation and their first part of lactation. It's also the time of year when fawns are being weaned. So maximizing nutrition during the growing season can be key to producing a very high-quality animal. Now, if you've got a lot of agriculture in your area that's growing soybeans and stuff like that, well, you don't have to worry about it. But not every area does.
Right.
Now, you can go back to back. And what a lot of people do here in the South is they go from a wintertime crop, an annual crop, and then come back in the spring and plant a summertime crop like soybeans or cowpeas or something like that. And you're exactly right. They produce a tremendous amount of forage for the time period while they're growing. But you also have a downtime between the time that they've matured off and you get back in and replant and stuff starts to grow again. And that downtime is you don't want, you know, basically the table's clean from the deer unless you've got, you know, different stages of crops in different areas. So that's one of the reasons why I like to have a perennial out there. And think something like, and I really have a hard time having, you know, if you know how to manage it right, it's hard to beat white clover as a food plot. Whether it's, you know, Durana clover or imperial, you know, there's hundreds of different varieties of white clover. But this is a food plot planting that can grow as much as a ton per acre per month or more of forage, dry weight, and do it over a 6 to 8 month, 9 month period. And even when it goes during the dormant season, that stuff is still green and still available if the deer haven't eaten it. So you almost get 365 days of availability, and you get 8 to 9 months, particularly here in the South, of production. That's hard to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and when you say production, that means that the green is there, and it's actually a great nutritional source for them.
Right, and you know, the clover is running a very high digestibility, very high protein content. It's a very high quality food. The problem is sometimes clover takes a little bit of, you got to play with it a little bit. It's hard to get established because it is so small seeded, so you got to do it just right to get the clover established. And just because it's a perennial doesn't mean you can leave it alone. It's going to develop a weed problem, particularly problems with grasses, because it is a nitrogen producer, and grasses will respond to that. You're going to get insect problems. You might get disease problems. But if you learn how to deal with those types of things, I had one food plot that was in white clover that lasted 13 years before I had to renovate it.
Wow,
that's impressive.
That was it was really impressive. But I had to use some herbicide treatments, and you have to fertilize it, you have to bush hog it, you have to maintain it.
Right.
You can't walk away from it.
Wow.
Another thing that I see a lot that the hunter puts out a great summer foliage, and then they go into a fall foliage, but there's a gap in between the summer and the fall maturity of the foliage. that's an important time of the growth. The last 5 weeks of the antler growth that's often missed there. How important is that there's a food source that puts on the tonnage and the mass and has the proper nutrition to grow the antlers and the protein? How important is that to have that summer to fall change?
Boy, I'll tell you what, you're almost taking some of the lecture notes out of my class.
Dr. Dusty Phillips. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
It's something that I thrive on. I live and breathe whitetail, so it definitely catches my attention that where the fails and the fails are absolutely maps to success, and if you fail, you succeed in the future. But
right.
there's a lot of things that are overlooked when it comes to growing, great antlered whitetails.
Right. Now, here, think about what is related to what you just said. It's not equal nutritionally being a whitetail deer throughout the year. And there are 2 times when it's nutritionally stressful, mostly nutritionally stressful for the whitetail deer. Obviously, one time is the winter time, where there's limitations in the quantity of food that might be available, right? Mm-hmm. The other time is during late summer, when it's not necessary that the quantity of the food is lowered, but the quality of the food is lowered. The plants are maturing, their lignin content's going up, their digestibility is going down, their protein content going down as they go through this maturation process. That is much more profound down here in the South than it is up in the Midwest or the New England states. And down here, it can be a very stressful, nutritionally stressful time for deer. Now, couple that with, like Dusty just said, that's the end of the antler growth period, and that's the period when the bucks are maximizing, putting on a lot of weight. But more importantly, that's the time period of year when does are still lactating and the fawns are being weaned off the doe's milk and onto the vegetation, which is declining in quality.
Right.
So growing a very nice quality, a very high quality deer, if you can get very high quality of forages into those fawns at the right time, you can maximize their ability to grow during their first 6 months as well.
And it's critical.
So targeting that, what we call the summertime stress period, which starts during those dog days of summer and goes at least until the first part when the first part of the mass starts to fall in the fall. And it's about a month, maybe 2 month period of time in there. That is a very nice place to target having your summertime food plots.
All right, absolutely. And a question often pops up: well, how do you grow massive antlers? Well, you got to start them from a young age, and it's almost like giving a human a shot of steroids. If you can keep them, nutritionally satisfied, the antler growth is phenomenal from the start.
Right. One thing people have to realize is antlers are a buck's luxury. Antlers are only produced by excess nutrition. And Correct. They will put the first amount of nutrition goes into maintaining their body and body growth, just maintenance. And then anything that's left over is something that they can shunt off into antler growth.
Gotcha. That's a good point.
To a large degree. Now that's not exclusive because they can mobilize some materials from some minerals from their body to put it into antler growth as well. But generally, in most cases, you consider that excess nutrition to grow the larger antlers.
Right. Absolutely. Going into a little bit in the soil detail, how important is a soil pH check?
Some of that is going to depend on where you are, whether you come from an area where you got limestone bedrock, or you have a karst topography, or South Texas or something. And then pH is never going to be an issue in some of those areas. Here in the South, we have some places up in the mountains where the pH is so low, we generally need to, on virgin soil, put to 3 to 4 tons per acre of lime. And then, just to try to bring that pH up.
Wow.
pH is very critical for plant growth because pH is what makes all the other minerals available, particularly a lot of the minerals or the elements that are important for plant growth, like nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium and so forth. And having a pH of, 6 or 6.5 to 7 is optimal. It's particularly important to some species of plants that are much more sensitive to low pH than others. And generally, the legumes, such as soybeans and cowpeas and clovers and stuff like that, are more sensitive to low pH than are things like the grasses, wheat, oats, and rye. But by not having your pH adjusted, if you have a pH below 6, you ended up wasting a certain percentage. And as the pH drops down from 6, you're wasting an increasing percentage of the fertilizer you put out there. So the best thing you can do to make that fertilizer available to the plants is make sure your pH is adjusted first and then fertilize.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Liming can be more important than fertilization, in other words.
And that's a very important aspect to somebody that's trying to build a correct food plot. that a soil sample, a basic soil sample that you can bag yourself, take 3 to 5 samples from a couple acre plot and get sent off, get it checked out, get the results back, and it's going to take your food plot to the next level.
Well, and not only that, it can save you a lot of money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're going to put $300 into an acre food plot.
Easy.
And it costs you $8 to get a soil test. It tells you exactly what you need. So if you buy a bag of fertilizer recently, it's a lot more than $8. And if your soil test saves you $8 or saves you a bag of fertilizer, it's paid for itself and more, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So it's economics. Makes sense.
Right.
Cool. Any other studies that you've got going on, Dr. Miller, that you'd like to point out that are kind of intriguing to you?
Well, we finished up a study not too long ago on deer hearing, and basically it turns out that deer hear about as good as we do, which is surprises an awful lot of people.
Right.
We hear a little bit better into the high pitches, the low pitches. They hear a little bit better into the high pitches, but really not that much better than we do.
No kidding. See, I would have guessed that they could hear better. Basically.
You would actually think so. Not because every hunter sat on a deer stand and you're sitting there and there's a deer sitting out in front of you and you're up there watching the deer and all of a sudden the deer picks up its head and because it heard something and looks in a different direction and you didn't hear it.
Right.
The question is, why didn't you hear it? Well, the difference is deer lives in the woods 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You don't.
Right.
Deer knows what it's supposed to hear and knows what it's not supposed to hear.
Right.
You've seen deer out there feeding on acorns, and a squirrel goes running through the woods and stuff like that. Deer doesn't even pick its head up.
Right.
But you do, because you're not sure what it was until you see it, right?
Right.
So, and the way I kind of equate this is, and my wife hates it when I give this as an example, but when you're driving your truck,
yeah,
and all of a sudden you hear something that's not quite right.
Yes.
There's something that, you know what your truck's supposed to sound like. And if it doesn't sound like that, there's something wrong with it.
Exactly.
My wife can't do that. So every once in a while I have to drive her truck so I can listen to it.
Right.
Because she'd be oblivious to it. But, so you know what you're supposed to hear and you know what you're not supposed to hear. Same thing as a noise in your house at night. You know what you're supposed to hear and you know what you're not supposed to hear.
Right.
That's the deer's world. They know what they're supposed to hear and they know what they're not supposed to hear.
Yeah. It's like why you don't sleep well when you travel to a new hotel room and you hear these sounds that are just foreign to you, just a little out of sync, and you stay up all
and
night.
that's what makes the perception that deer can hear so much better.
Gotcha.
Now, that's with a caveat because deer have these large external ears. And when they have those large external ears cupped in a specific direction, that does enhance. It's like putting one of those, when you cup your hand to your ear,
yep,
it helps funnel those sound waves into the ear. So it actually helps the deer when they cup that ear towards the sound to enhance the sound that they're getting from that direction. And it helps the deer to localize the direction and the source of that sound.
Gotcha.
But it also comes with a negative because when a deer's got its ear pointed in one direction, it's got its ear pointed away from the other direction. So it won't hear from the other direction quite as well. So that's why deer keep, constantly swiveling their ears in different directions to pick up in different locations.
Right. That makes sense. Well, Dr. Miller, this has gone by extremely fast. We've gone over an hour, and it feels like 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
And we could talk, like as you said, until 7 o'clock in the morning if we really wanted to. However, I think your wife probably would like you to get on with the things you had to do in the house. It's my guess.
You get to the honey-do list, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't want to take away from your marriage, so I'm going to let you get back to that. But thank you so much for joining us tonight and just giving us some deep insight into the whitetail and stuff we just don't hear every day. And it's I thank you from our community for.
Oh, guys, I enjoy doing this. That's why I got into this field, is because it's a passion of mine, it's a love of mine. This critter out there that God created, and anything that I can do to help other people enjoy it as much as I do, I'd be glad to do it.
Excellent,
awesome. We're going to definitely have you back on for a repeat guest to the Big Buck Registry, Big Buck podcast.
It might cost you more next time.
Okay. Wow, man, just wow.
Can I sit here, take 30 seconds, let me just soak all this in?
My head hurts.
My head is just thriving on new information to take to the woods and apply.
Did you hear that? He said that you are practically writing his itinerary for the next class.
Well, I just want to let the people know that we're serious about whitetail hunting at the Big Buck podcast, and I don't want us to ruffle my feathers, but the proof's in the pudding, and we enjoy talking about, and we know what we're talking about here at the Big Buck Registry, Big Buck podcast, and we're here to help you.
There's only a couple things that I like more than talking about deer hunting. One of them is deer hunting, and we won't talk about the other one.
You know, the thing that I like about deer hunting and all of this is there's always something else that you can learn to take your hunt to the next level. And man, we're so focused on that we want you to succeed while you're in the woods. And that's the whole focal point of all this.
Yes, we want
you to benefit from the people we talk to, the people that we take. It could take weeks for us to get in touch with these people. And we just keep pushing ourselves to find the best content for the listeners.
You know, if you have this tool, and if I had this tool when I was a young man, and when I was a child, when my dad was teaching me to hunt, and I love my father. I have to admit, though, he's not the most polished hunter in the world. But he knew enough to take me in the woods to introduce me to it. And if I had this podcast from that point on, I would be far ahead of the game as far as being a successful and polished whitetail hunter. And it's not just... Like, I cherish those moments that I spent with my father in the woods, but I cherish every moment I spend in the woods, too. And if I had something like this back then, because back then you didn't have this,
right.
I would have so much more head start on that. So if you're a young hunter and you want to kind of tune up your game a little bit, this is the show to listen to. And there are other great ones out there, too, but we purposely pursue the guest as diligently as we pursue our whitetails when we're in the woods.
You know, absolutely. I don't know how to say this without tooting our horns, but it's for us, and it's especially for the listeners. I mean, this right here, this podcast today will take your hunt to the next level if you sit down and soak it all in and take it out to the field and use it.
Yep.
It will make you more successful in the whitetail woods.
Absolutely. No question about it.
No question.
I would like to give just a quick shout out to our good friend Griff and our good friend Billy Daw. Just two of our diehard fans, and we've got open lines of communication with them offline and off the air. And I got to say, I just love it. I just love being able to communicate with fans that are so passionate about our show and that are so passionate about deer hunting too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and definitely shout out to Griff and Billy Dahl. Man, I tell you, it's real interesting to talk to both of them gentlemen. They're fine gentlemen, and they're all the time leading us to something that we haven't experienced.
Yeah, they constantly come up with ideas. And,
right.
And Griff especially, he's always throwing ideas our way.
Yeah, it's the craziest thing, but yeah, it's real interesting.
It's very interesting, and it's good to have feedback like that about and just get some ideas about where you want us to go with this show. Who do you want us to have on the show? Because right now we can get a guest. It takes work, but we do have the abilities these days. We have some shows behind us, and it's a little easier to ask that guest to be on the show now that we have 70 shows behind us and over 100,000 followers between my page and your page on Facebook. We have some weight to say, hey, this is legitimate. Yeah,
absolutely. We're going to be here for a long time, and we really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Without our listeners, I wouldn't say we would be nobody, but we definitely wouldn't have the drive to get the information that we've been getting.
Yes.
It's getting better. We say weekly that, there's no way we can top this, but somehow, some way we push the extra mile and we top it.
Just like pushing the envelope and pushing striving to be better every single week. And because it's just the better the show, the more knowledge you consume, and the better hunter you're going to be, and really get to appreciate and be part of that whitetail woods.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's one of the things where you see pro hunters on TV, and they're pro hunters. We want to make every listener a pro hunter that goes to the woods, listens to the show. You go to the woods and you put the pro hunter aspect to chase and mature whitetails, and that's what we want to do. We want to make you the best hunter possible.
That's it. And I want to make me the best deer hunter too, because I know there are a lot of great deer hunters out there that I can learn from. And if I can find this medium, this format to share those stories, like being a fly on the wall, listening to the conversations that we're having with some of the most amazing whitetail individuals that are in the country, this is what I'm doing. This is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to bring through this medium of podcasting. So thank you for tuning in. I can't appreciate it enough, and appreciate you enough and just keep going back, because we're going to keep putting it out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's amazing the stories that's been told on the Big Buck Registry, Big Buck podcast. You know, just the co-host of the show, it blows my mind, and I know as a listener, it's got to definitely spice up your hunting life as far as the knowledge that you have learned right here on the podcast. And that's what it's all about. You know, we're hunters for hunters, giving back to hunters weekly.
Absolutely. Dusty, how can we find you if we want to reach out to you?
No, I don't think mine's quite going to be as long as yours.
Blah, blah. Yeah.
Big Buck, everywhere Big Buck.
Everywhere Big Buck.
Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. And you can look me up at Dusty Hunt Neck right there on Facebook too. Jay, are you ready?
I am.
Are you ready to rumble?
First and foremost, I would like to invite you to come join us on iTunes, where you can subscribe to the podcast, which means you will get notification that there's a new show out. You will get, you can give us a review. So if you could go subscribe for free, review our show for, just jump on your iTunes device or your iDevice, and you can go there and give us a review, a 5-star, hopefully. But if you don't feel like we're worthy of it, we'll understand. That's where I'd like to invite you to come first and listen to the shows. Listen to all the back shows, all 70 shows, because they're admittedly are the latest work we've done probably in the last, 30 shows, Dusty, is our best work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting better every show.
It gets better every show. But some of the best stuff we've done has probably come in the last 6 months, I would say, because we're just getting better and better at this. After that, if you'd like to join us on our website, which is www.bigbuckregistry.com, you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Big Buck Registry, twitter.com/Big Buck Registry. We're on YouTube, which is youtube.com/Big Buck Registry. And if you'd like to submit a deer to our Facebook page and be famous for a day for a deer that you shot on our Wall of Fame, go to www.bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck. And finally, the phone number is 724-613-2825. Leave us some feedback about the show if you'd like to call in. And if you'd like to do a share for share because you have an outdoor group or an outdoor page and you'd like us to share you on our page and vice versa, all you got to do is go to www.bigbuckregistry.com/S4S. There.
Wow.
There.
Awesome.
Whew.
Awesome.
Well, Dusty, another amazing show. Thank you to Dr. Karl Miller for joining us once again.
Definitely check out Premier Outfitters, Western Kentucky.
Yes, definitely. I think we'll come back and do this again next week. What do you say?
Absolutely.
All righty, man. I'm Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. See you next week.
Can't wait.